Commander Jake Harrison stood at the window of his ship, watching the burning planet below. The fires covered half the world. What had once been a beautiful blue and green planet was now orange and red with flames. Smoke rose up into space like dark fingers reaching for the stars. "Sir, another message from the alien fleet," said Lieutenant Lisa Morgan from her seat at the communications panel. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Everyone on the bridge knew they were watching the end of a civilization. Jake turned away from the window. His ship, the Defiant, was small compared to the massive alien vessels floating nearby. Those ships were packed with refugees. Millions of beings who had lost everything they had ever known. "Put it on the main screen," Jake said, the holographic display came to life. An alien face appeared, unlike anything Jake had seen before. The being's skin looked like crystal, changing colors as he spoke. His eyes were large and sad. This was Elder Zethver, leader of what remained of the Kaleri people. "Human vessel," the alien said. "We ask for safe passage through your space. Our people have nowhere else to go." "Our home is gone?" Jake had studied alien cultures during his years at the academy. The Kaleri were ancient, older than any other known race. They had once ruled 3 entire star systems. Their warriors had been famous across the galaxy for their honor and courage. But that was long ago, before the great wars that had torn the galaxy apart. "Elder Zethver," Jake replied, "you have our protection. We will escort you to safety." He paused, then asked, "But I must know, what happened to the Knights of the Void?" The alien's expression changed. His crystal skin grew darker, like a storm cloud passing over the sun. "The Knights of the Void," he repeated slowly. "Commander, that is a name I have not heard spoken with respect in many years. My people learned about them in our history classes," Jake said. "They were guardians, protectors of the innocent. What happened to them?" Zethver looked tired, older than his years. "They became inconvenient, Commander. In a galaxy where profit matters more than people, where strength is valued over kindness, there was no place for knights." Lisa Morgan looked up from her controls. "Sir, the refugee fleet is ready to move. They're asking for our lead." Jake nodded. "Set course for Earth space, maximum escort formation." He looked back at the holographic display. "Elder, tell me more about these knights." As the human ship began to guide the alien refugees away from their dying world, Zethver began to speak. His voice carried the weight of centuries, the sadness of a people who had lost everything. "Long ago, Commander, the galaxy was different. There were many species, just as there are now. But they were bound together by something greater than trade agreements or military alliances. They were connected by honor." Jake settled into his command chair, fascinated. This was not the galaxy he knew. In his time, most species barely tolerated each other. Wars were common, trust was rare. "The Knights of the Void were not just Kaleri," Zethver continued. "Every species had their own version. The Thalans called them shield-bearers. The humans might have called them guardians. Different names, but the same purpose. They protected those who could not protect themselves." "What made them special?" Jake asked. "They served something greater than themselves. Not their government, not their species, but justice itself. They had codes of honor that crossed all boundaries. A Kaleri knight would die to protect a Thalan child. A Thalan knight would give his life for a Kaleri elder. They were brothers and sisters in all but blood." Dr. Amanda Price, the ship's expert on alien cultures, had been listening quietly. Now she stepped forward. "Elder, if these knights were so important, why did they disappear?" Zethver's skin flickered with darker colors. "Politics, Doctor, war, fear, the great powers of the galaxy decided that honor was a luxury they could not afford." Knights asked difficult questions. They stood between the powerful and the helpless. They made uncomfortable demands. "Such as?" Jake prompted. "They demanded that the strong protect the weak, not exploit them. They insisted that justice was more important than profit. They refused to ignore suffering even when it was convenient to do so." Jake thought about this. In his experience, most military forces served their own governments first. The idea of warriors who served universal principles was almost impossible to imagine. The first to go were the smaller orders, Zethver explained. Species under pressure from their neighbors dissolved their knight chapters to put more resources into their regular armies. Then came the Great Wars. Knights from different species found themselves on opposite sides of conflicts they had no part in starting. That must have been terrible, Lisa said quietly. It was, young one. Imagine being forced to fight against someone you had sworn to protect. Many knights simply laid down their weapons and walked away. Others died trying to stop wars they could not prevent. The refugee fleet moved slowly through space, a long line of ships carrying the last survivors of an ancient people. Jake watched them on his tactical display, thinking about what he was hearing. The final blow came 50 years ago, Zethver continued. The Dominion Wars. The major powers decided that any form of independent military force was a threat to galactic stability. Knight orders were banned, their members forced to choose between their oaths and their homeworlds. What did they choose? Jake asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Most chose their homeworlds. They had families, responsibilities. They could not abandon their people even for their ideals. The few who refused were hunted down and destroyed. Dr. Price frowned. But surely some survived? Hidden away, perhaps? We were the last, Zethver said simply. The Kaleri Knights of the Void maintained their traditions in secret for 50 years. We protected trade routes, helped refugees, fought pirates. We tried to keep the flame alive. And now? Now we are refugees. Ourselves, our world is burning. Our order is broken. The last knights in the galaxy are fleeing in merchant ships, begging for sanctuary. Jake felt something stirring in his chest. Anger, maybe, or determination. He had always believed that there were things worth fighting for beyond national interests. The idea that such beliefs had once been common, that entire orders of warriors had dedicated their lives to protecting others, made him feel both inspired and sad. Elder, Jake said slowly, what if the flame doesn't have to die out? Zethver looked at him sharply. What do you mean, Commander? I mean, what if someone remembered how to be a knight? What if someone was willing to learn the old ways? The alien's crystal skin began to glow faintly. Commander, the galaxy has changed. The old ways are considered foolish, outdated. Who would want to learn them? Jake smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Humans are stubborn, Elder. We have a habit of believing in things that others call impossible. We also have a long tradition of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. You would truly consider this? I would consider it an honor. The refugee fleet continued its journey toward Earth space, but something had changed. In the depths of space, an old man who had lost everything began to hope again. And on a human ship, a commander began to dream of something the galaxy had forgotten. Behind them, the Kaleri homeworld continued to burn, but ahead lay the possibility of something new. Something that had been lost could perhaps be found again. The galaxy had forgotten knights, but maybe it was time to remember them as the stars wheeled overhead. Jake Harrison made a decision that would change the fate of countless worlds. He would learn the old ways. He would find others who shared his vision. And somehow he would bring the knights back to the stars. The journey to Earth would take several days. Jake spent that time learning everything he could about the ancient traditions. The more he learned, the more certain he became that the galaxy needed knights again. Not the knights of old, bound by species and politics, but something new. Something better, something human. 6 months had passed since the Kaleri. Refugees arrived on Earth. The alien survivors had settled into a small colony on the northern continent, trying to rebuild their shattered lives. Elder Zethver spent most of his time in the Great Library of New Geneva, documenting the lost history of his people. Commander Jake Harrison stood in the council chamber, facing 12 of the most powerful people on Earth. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of air recycling systems. Outside the tall windows, the city of Geneva stretched toward the horizon, its lights twinkling in the afternoon sun. "Let me understand this correctly," said Counselor Helen Barnes, leaning forward in her chair. "You want to create a military academy based on alien traditions that died out 50 years ago?" Jake had expected this reaction. The council members were practical people who dealt with real problems like food distribution, trade agreements, and defense budgets. His proposal must have seemed like fantasy to them. Not just alien traditions, Counselor. Universal principles that many species once shared. The idea that some things are worth protecting, regardless of profit or politics. Counselor Robert Chun shook his head. "Commander, we already have excellent military training programs. Our officers are among the best in the galaxy. Why do we need something different?" Jake activated the holographic display he had prepared. Images of various alien species appeared in the air above the conference table. These were the species that had once maintained night orders, because our current training creates soldiers and officers. Good ones, but they serve Earth first. What I'm proposing would create something different. Different how? Asked Counselor Barnes. Knights who serve justice first, their species second. Warriors who would protect a stranger as readily as they would protect their own family. People who cannot be bought, threatened, or corrupted because they serve something greater than themselves. Elder Zethfer entered the chamber, moving slowly on his walking stick. The old alien had aged visibly since losing his homeworld, but his eyes still held the fire of conviction. "Honorable Council," Zethfer said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "may I speak to what Commander Harrison proposes?" Counselor Barnes nodded. "Of course, Elder, your perspective would be valuable." The Night Orders were not merely military organizations. They were the conscience of galactic civilization. When the powerful oppressed the weak, Knights stood between them. When species went to war over resources, Knights found peaceful solutions. When disasters struck, Knights were first to arrive and last to leave. Captain Susan Blake, a veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, spoke up. "Elder, that sounds admirable in theory. But in practice, how do you prevent such an organization from becoming corrupted or co-opted by political interests?" "By making service to the greater good more important than loyalty to any government," Zethfer replied. Knights took oaths that bound them to universal principles. They could not serve their birth species above justice itself. Counselor Martin Ross frowned. "That sounds like a recipe for divided loyalties. What happens when Earth's interests conflict with these universal principles?" Jake had wrestled with this question for months. Then the Knights choose the principles. Earth would be stronger for having citizens who put right before convenience. And if Earth's government disagrees with that choice, then Earth's government would be wrong. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Several council members exchanged glances. The idea of a military force that might defy government orders was troubling to politicians used to clear chains of command. Dr. Amanda Price, who had been studying Knight traditions alongside Jake, stepped forward. "Council members, I've spent months analyzing the historical records. Societies with active Knight orders were more stable, more prosperous, and more peaceful than those without them." "Correlation is not causation, Doctor," Counselor Chun pointed out. "True, but the correlation is strong across multiple species and time periods. Knights served as a stabilizing force, preventing the kind of spiral into brutality that we've seen in recent galactic conflicts." Captain Blake stood up. Her uniform bore the ribbons of a dozen campaigns, and her scarred face spoke of battles fought in the darkness between stars. "Council members, I've fought in 3 wars. I've seen what happens when military forces operate without moral constraints. I've watched good soldiers do terrible things because they were following orders." She paused, looking around the room. "If we're going to be a major power in this galaxy, we need to be worthy of that power. The Knight traditions might be the key to that." The debate continued for hours. Some council members worried about the cost of establishing a new academy. Others questioned whether humans could successfully adapt alien traditions. A few were concerned about creating an elite military caste that might challenge civilian authority, but slowly opinion began to shift. The recent wars had shown that traditional military thinking was not enough. The galaxy was changing, becoming more dangerous and more complex. Perhaps it was time to try something different. The final vote was close, but the proposal passed. Jake would be granted leave from his regular duties to establish the Terra Nova Knight Academy. The facility would be built on a remote island in the Pacific, away from the distractions of normal military life. You have 6 months to show us that this isn't just an expensive experiment, Counselor Barnes warned. The first class of graduates will be closely watched. Jake nodded. Understood, Counselor. We won't disappoint you. As the council session ended, Elder Zephyr approached Jake. The old alien's crystal skin was glowing with barely contained excitement. Commander, I never thought I would live to see this day. The possibility of new knights, trained in the old ways but adapted for a new age. I'll need your help, Elder. The traditions, the training methods, the codes of honor. Humans are good at adapting things, but we need to understand what we're adapting. You shall have everything I know. Every secret, every technique, every lesson learned over 2,000 years of knight tradition. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Construction crews worked around the clock to build the academy facilities. Jake and his team developed curricula that combined traditional knight training with modern military science. Most importantly, they began recruiting instructors. The first to volunteer was Captain Susan Blake, who resigned her commission to join the academy staff. I'm tired of training soldiers to follow orders, she explained. I want to train people to do what's right. Dr. Amanda Price took leave from her university position to develop the Cultural Studies program. Knights will need to understand the species they protect, she said. A human knight serving in Thaylen space must know how Thaylens think, what they value, what they fear. Other humans joined the effort. Lieutenant Alex Turner, a decorated Special Forces officer, became the head of tactical training. Dr. Rachel Stone, a specialist in alien psychology, developed programs for cross-species communication. Engineer Marcus Webb designed training equipment that could simulate combat conditions on dozens of different worlds. But perhaps most importantly, other species began to take notice. A delegation of Altarian diplomats visited the academy site, curious about humanity's attempt to revive the knight traditions. Representatives from the Centauri Federation asked for copies of the training materials. Even some former enemies expressed interest in the project. The first class of candidates arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. They came from all walks of human life. Soldiers seeking a higher purpose, doctors who wanted to help in war zones, engineers who dreamed of building rather than destroying, and scholars who believed that knowledge should serve justice. Among them was Lieutenant Alex Turner. Despite his role as an instructor, I want to be the first, he explained. If I'm going to teach others to be knights, I need to understand what it means. Dr. Rachel Stone had also enrolled as a student. The galaxy is full of species we barely understand, she said. If I'm going to help knights communicate with aliens, I need to know what knights go through. Jake stood before the assembled candidates on their first day. The academy's main hall was simple but impressive, with tall windows looking out over the ocean. The walls were decorated with symbols from dozens of species, representing the universal nature of the knight ideal. The galaxy will test you, Jake told them. You'll face enemies who call honor a weakness. You'll meet allies who care more about profit than principles. You'll encounter situations where doing the right thing costs everything you have. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each candidate. But if we succeed, we won't just be creating knights. We'll be bringing back something the galaxy thought was lost forever. We'll be proving that there are still people willing to fight for others, not just for themselves. The training began immediately. Physical conditioning pushed human limits. Combat exercises used weapons from a dozen worlds. Academic classes covered the history and culture of every known species. But most importantly, the candidates learned the code that would govern their lives. Protect the innocent. Speak truth to power. show mercy to the defeated. Never abandon a comrade. Serve something greater than yourself. Elder Zethver taught classes on Knight philosophy, sharing wisdom accumulated over centuries. The communication came at dawn, when most of the Terra Nova Academy was still sleeping. Knight Captain Alex Turner was in the training hall, practicing sword forms that Elder Zethver had taught him when the emergency alert sounded. All senior Knights to the command center immediately. Came the announcement over the academy speakers. Alex dropped his practice sword and ran through the corridors. Other knights were doing the same, pulling on uniforms as they moved. In 6 months of training, they had never heard an emergency alert. Something serious was happening. Jake Harrison stood at the center of the command room, his face grim. Holographic displays showed star charts and ship movements in the Proxima system, 12 light-years from Earth. The images were not encouraging. "Gentlemen, ladies," Jake said as the senior knights assembled, "we have our first real mission. The hegemony has blockaded the Velen homeworld. They're demanding the Velens surrender their biotechnology research or face starvation." Dr. Rachel Stone, now Knight Commander Stone, studied the tactical display. "How many ships?" 3 battleships, 12 escort vessels. "Against that, we have 1 cruiser and our training." The silence in the room was heavy. Everyone knew the odds were terrible. The hegemony was one of the galaxy's major powers, with resources that dwarfed anything Earth could put in space. Their ships were larger, better armed, and more numerous than anything the Knights possessed. "Sir," said Knight Lieutenant Ben Walker, "what do the Velens have that the hegemony wants so badly?" "Medical technology," Jake replied. "The Velens have developed treatments for diseases that affect multiple species. The hegemony wants to monopolize it, charge whatever they want for cures that could save millions of lives." Alex felt anger rising in his chest. This was exactly the kind of situation the Knights had been created to handle. The powerful bullying the weak, innocent people suffering while politicians argued about jurisdiction. "What are our orders?" Alex asked. "We don't have orders from Earth Command," Jake said. "This is outside human territory. Officially, it's not our problem." "But," Rachel prompted, "but 12 million Velens are going to starve if someone doesn't stop the blockade. The Galactic Council is meeting to discuss the situation, but they'll debate for months while people die." Elder Zethver entered the command center, moving slowly but with purpose. The old alien had heard the alert and come as quickly as his aging body would allow. "The Velens are a peaceful people," he said. "They have never harmed anyone, never threatened any species. Their only crime is possessing something that others want." Alex looked around the room at his fellow knights. These were people who had given up normal military careers to serve something greater than themselves. They had trained for months, learning to put universal principles above personal interests. Now they faced their first test. "We have to go," Alex said quietly. Jake nodded. "I hoped you would say that. The Excalibur is being prepared for departure. We'll have 12 knights aboard, plus a full crew." 12 knights against an entire hegemony fleet? Ben Walker shook his head. "Sir, that's not a mission. That's suicide." "Maybe," Jake admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing means accepting terrible odds." The knights spent the next 6 hours preparing for departure. They checked their equipment, studied hegemony tactics, and reviewed everything they knew about Velen culture. Most importantly, they discussed their strategy. "We can't win a straight fight," Rachel said during their final briefing. "The hegemony? Ships outgun us 50-1. "Then we don't fight a straight fight," Alex replied. "We do what knights are supposed to do. We bear witness." The plan they developed was simple and dangerous. The Excalibur would insert itself between the hegemony fleet and the Velen homeworld. They would refuse to move, no matter what threats the hegemony made. They would broadcast everything that happened, ensuring that the galaxy could see exactly what the hegemony was willing to do to innocent people. "It might not work," Jake warned them. "The hegemony might simply destroy us and claim we were aggressors." "Then we die as knights," Alex said. That's better than living as cowards. The journey to Proxima took 3 days. During that time, the knights continued their training, knowing that they might face combat despite their peaceful intentions. They also studied hegemony culture, looking for any advantage they could find. Dr. Rachel Stone spent hours analyzing hegemony communication. Intercepts. Their command structure is rigid, she reported. Orders come from the top down, with little room for individual initiative. But that also means individual commanders might question orders if given a reason. What kind of reason? Alex asked. Honor. The hegemony claims to be an honorable empire. Their founding documents speak of protecting the weak and serving justice. They've just forgotten what those words mean. When the Excalibur dropped out of hyperspace in the Proxima system, the situation was worse than they had feared. The hegemony blockade was complete, with ships positioned to intercept any vessel trying to reach or leave the Velen homeworld. The planet itself was beautiful from space, blue and green like Earth, but scanner readings showed that the population centers were already experiencing food shortages. Hegemony Fleet, this is Knight Captain Turner of the Terra Nova Order, Alex broadcast on all frequencies. You are blockading a peaceful species in violation of the Galactic Accords. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The response came quickly as expected. Human vessel, you have no authority here. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Leave immediately or be destroyed. Instead of leaving, the Excalibur moved closer to the Velen homeworld, positioning itself directly between the largest hegemony battleship and the planet's main population center. This is Knight Captain Turner, Alex broadcast again. We will not leave while innocent people suffer. We call upon all beings who remember what honor means to witness what happens here. What followed was perhaps the longest 72 hours in galactic history. The Excalibur sat motionless in space, a tiny ship dwarfed by the massive hegemony vessels surrounding it. The knights aboard took turns broadcasting reports about the situation, describing the suffering of the Velen people and the arrogance of their oppressors. More importantly, they began broadcasting the Knights' Code itself. They read the principles that govern their actions, explaining why they were willing to die for strangers. They spoke of honor, justice, and the duty to protect the innocent. The effect was electric. News networks across the galaxy picked up the story. Other species began to pay attention. Support messages poured in from dozens of worlds, many from species that had barely heard of humanity before, but the real breakthrough came when Knight Lieutenant Ben Walker, monitoring hegemony communications, detected something unexpected. Some of the hegemony officers were arguing with their commanders. Captain Turner, Ben reported, I'm picking up internal traffic. Not all of them agree with the blockade. Rachel Stone, serving as the mission's diplomatic specialist, had been studying hegemony culture for months. Alex, they have honor codes too. They've just been corrupted by politics and greed. Some of their officers might still remember what those codes originally meant. Alex made a decision that would be studied in military academies for generations. He opened a direct channel to the entire hegemony fleet and made an offer that no one expected. To any hegemony officers who remember what honor truly means, we offer you a choice. Join us. Stand with the innocent against the oppressor. The Knights of Terra welcome all beings who would protect those who cannot protect themselves. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then slowly, 3 hegemony ships broke formation and moved toward the human vessel. The lead ship was commanded by Commander Thaxel, a veteran officer who had served the hegemony for 30 years. His voice came over the communication channel, filled with emotion. Knight Captain Turner, I have spent decades watching my government become something I no longer recognize. Today you have reminded me why I first put on this uniform. I request permission to serve alongside the Knights of Terra. 2 other hegemony ships followed Thaxel's lead. Their commanders also spoke of honor forgotten and principles abandoned. They had been waiting for someone to show them another way. The remaining hegemony vessels found themselves facing an impossible situation. They could not attack the human knights without also attacking their own former comrades. They could not maintain the blockade while under the galaxy's watching eyes. Most importantly, they could no longer claim to represent justice when their own officers had defected to the other side. Within hours, the blockade began to crumble. Ships started withdrawing, claiming technical problems or supply shortages. The Hegemony Fleet Commander, Admiral Corex, sent a final message before departing. "This is not over, humans. You have interfered in matters beyond your understanding." "Perhaps," Alex replied. "But 12 million Velans will live because of that interference. Sometimes that's enough." As relief ships began reaching the Velan homeworld, the galaxy watched in amazement. A handful of human knights and a few hegemony defectors had accomplished what the major powers had been unwilling to attempt. They had stood up to tyranny and won, not through superior firepower, but through moral courage. Commander Thaxel requested permission to visit the Terra Nova Academy. The news traveled fast across the galaxy. Within weeks of the Proxima incident, messages began arriving at the Terra Nova Academy from dozens of worlds. Young beings from species that had never heard of humanity wanted to become knights. Veterans from the Great Wars asked if they could serve again with honor. Jake Harrison stood in his office, looking at the pile of recruitment requests covering his desk. Each message represented someone who had heard about the knights and wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. "Sir," said Lieutenant Lisa Morgan, entering with another stack of communications, "we have requests from the Altarian Defense Corps, the Centauri Federation, and even some from the Outer Rim territories." Jake picked up one of the messages and read it. The writer was a young Phelan female named Cassara, who had lost her family in a pirate raid. She wanted to join the Knights so that other families would not suffer as hers had. "How many total requests do we have now?" Jake asked. "Over 3,000, sir. And that's just from this week." Jake shook his head in amazement. 6 months ago, the idea of reviving the Night Orders had seemed impossible. Now, beings from across the galaxy were volunteering to serve principles they had only recently learned about. Commander Thaxel entered the office. The former hegemony officer had adapted well to life at the academy, though he still struggled with the informal atmosphere that humans preferred. "Grandmaster," Thaxel said, using the title that the growing Night organization had given Jake, "I bring troubling news from my former contacts in the hegemony." "What kind of news?" "The corporate syndicate has been funding pirate raids against worlds that have requested night protection. They view our order as a threat to their business interests." Jake was not surprised. The corporate syndicate made enormous profits by exploiting weaker species, strip mining their worlds, and forcing them into unfair trade agreements. Knights who protected the innocent would naturally interfere with such activities. "How serious is the threat?" Jake asked. "Very serious. They have also been spreading propaganda, claiming that Knights are human agents seeking to create an empire." "Doctor." Rachel Stone appeared in the doorway. "Jake, we have a bigger problem. The hegemony government has declared the Terra Nova Order a terrorist organization. They're demanding that member species expel any Knights from their territory." Jake sat down heavily in his chair. Success had brought new challenges that he had not fully anticipated. The more effective the Knights became, the more enemies they would make among those who profited from injustice. "We need to make a decision," Jake said finally. "We can stay small, pure, and ultimately powerless, or we can grow large enough to make a real difference and risk losing our way." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked. "I mean, we need to establish Night chapters on other worlds with other species leading them. We need to become truly galactic, not just a human organization with alien members." Thaxel nodded slowly. "That would require a new structure, new leadership, and new ways to ensure that we do not become corrupted by politics or power." "Exactly. We need rules that will govern all Night Orders, regardless of species or location. We need to ensure that a Thalen Knight follows the same principles as a human Knight." Over the next month, Jake worked with representatives from every species that had joined the Order to develop what would become known as the Charter of Honor. The process was difficult. with each species bringing their own cultural perspectives and concerns. The Phalans, who were naturally cautious, wanted detailed rules for every possible situation. The Altarians, who valued personal freedom, resisted any restrictions on individual choice. The humans, as usual, wanted to balance idealism with practicality. Elder Zethver served as the meeting's moderator, drawing on his knowledge of how the ancient Night Orders had handled similar problems. The old orders made a mistake, he explained. During one heated debate, they allowed too much variation between species. A Kalari Knight and a Phalan Knight might serve completely different codes, leading to conflict when they worked together. But we can't ignore cultural differences, argued Commander Kasara, the young Phalan who had become one of the Order's rising leaders. What honors one species might shame another. True, Zethver agreed. But there must be core principles that unite us all, universal values that transcend cultural boundaries. The final charter was a masterpiece of diplomatic compromise. It established 5 fundamental principles that all knights must follow: protect the innocent, seek justice over convenience, show mercy to the defeated, never abandon a comrade, serve the greater good above personal or species interests. More importantly, the charter created the Tribunal of Peers, a governing body made up of senior knights from different species. No single race could dominate the order, and any knight accused of violating the code would be judged by representatives of other species. The charter faced its first test sooner than anyone expected. The Terran Defense Force, growing concerned about the Knights' independence, ordered Knight Captain Alex Turner to support a human colony's claim to a disputed world. The problem was that the planet already had native inhabitants who had been there for thousands of years. Alex's response became legendary throughout the Night Orders. Standing before a panel of Earth military commanders, he spoke words that would be repeated by knights for generations to come. I serve the code first, humanity second, and politics not at all. The humans were furious. They stripped Alex of his military rank and ordered him to return to Earth for court-martial. But Alex refused to leave his current assignment protecting refugees in the Outer Rim territories. The incident created exactly the kind of crisis that critics had predicted. Human politicians demanded that the Night Orders be disbanded or brought under government control. Other species watched carefully to see how the Knights would handle the situation. Jake Harrison faced the most difficult decision of his life. He could order Alex to return to Earth, preserving the Night Order's relationship with humanity but violating their principles. Or he could support Alex's decision and risk losing human support entirely. The answer came from an unexpected source. Knight Commander Thaxel, the former hegemony officer, requested permission to address the Earth Council. Honorable counselors, Thaxel said, standing before the same body that had authorized the Knight Academy, I served the hegemony for 30 years. I followed every order, obeyed every command, served my government without question. And in doing so, I became part of a system that oppressed the innocent and rewarded the cruel. He paused, looking around the chamber. Knight Captain Turner chose honor over convenience. In my former service, such choices were impossible because we served only our government's interests. The Knights serve something greater, and that makes them more valuable, not less. Captain Susan Blake, now a senior instructor at the Academy, spoke next. Council members, the question is not whether Knights should obey orders. The question is whether we want protectors who will do what is right, even when it is difficult. The debate that followed became known as the Conclave of Principles. For 3 days, the Earth Council wrestled with fundamental questions about duty, loyalty, and moral responsibility. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied no one completely but preserved the Night Order's independence. Knights would be considered Earth citizens but not Earth soldiers. They could not be ordered to act against their code, but they also could not claim to represent Earth's government. Alex Turner's case was quietly dropped, and he continued his work protecting refugees. But the precedent was established. Knights served universal principles, not national interests. Within a year, similar crises erupted across the galaxy as Night Orders spread to new worlds. Altarian knights refused to support their government's territorial expansion. Thaylen knights protected enemy civilians during a border conflict. Centauri knights arrested corrupt officials from their own species. Each time, the local governments protested. Each time, the Knight Order stood firm. Gradually, the galaxy began to understand that these were truly independent protectors, not agents of any particular species or government. The corporate syndicate's response was predictable. They increased funding for pirate groups, hoping to overwhelm the knights with too many crises to handle. They spread propaganda claiming that knights were naive idealists who would weaken galactic civilization, but their efforts backfired. Every attack on innocent civilians protected by knights only demonstrated why such protectors were needed. Every piece of propaganda was answered by documented evidence of knight heroism and sacrifice. More importantly, the knights began to coordinate their efforts across species lines. Human knights worked alongside Thaylen knights. Former hegemony officers trained Altarian recruits. The ancient dream of universal cooperation was becoming reality. By the end of the year, Knight Orders existed on over 100 worlds. They operated schools for war orphans, hospitals in conflict zones, and escort services for refugee convoys. They mediated disputes between species, hunted down pirates and slavers, and stood guard against any who would prey upon the innocent. The galaxy was slowly remembering what it meant to have protectors who served justice rather than politics. But greater challenges lay ahead. In the darkness between the stars, the first reports came from the edge of the galaxy, where deep space sensors detected something impossible. Ships unlike anything ever seen before were crossing the void between galaxies, moving toward inhabited space with terrifying purpose. Grand Master Jake Harrison, now an old man with gray hair and lined face, stood in the command center of Sanctuary Station. The fortress had been built on a barren world in neutral space, serving as the headquarters for all Knight Orders across the galaxy. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from the Outer Rim," reported Knight Commander Lisa Morgan, who had served alongside Jake since the early days. 3 star systems have gone completely silent. No communication, no energy signatures, nothing. Jake studied the tactical display with growing concern. The advancing force was massive, numbering in the thousands of ships. Worse, preliminary scans suggested they were not machines but living creatures the size of battleships. "Any response to our communication attempts?" "Nothing, sir. They don't seem interested in talking." Elder Zethver, now ancient and confined to a hover chair, was brought into the command center by his aide. The old Kalari's crystal skin had faded to a dull gray, but his mind remained sharp. "Grandmaster," Zethver said, his voice weak but urgent, "I have seen similar descriptions in the oldest records. My people called them the Void Swarm. They came from the darkness between galaxies, consuming everything in their path." "When was this?" Jake asked, before recorded history. The ancient texts spoke of creatures that thought as one mind, that could not be reasoned with or defeated through conventional warfare. They were driven away only through great sacrifice. Knight Captain Alex Turner, now a senior commander with scars from a dozen battles, entered the command center. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. The major powers are mobilizing their fleets, but they're not coordinating. The hegemony is fortifying their core worlds. The corporate syndicate is evacuating their most profitable territories. The Federation is arguing about defense strategies." Jake was not surprised. For decades, the galaxy's great powers had grown apart, each focused on their own interests. They had military might but no unity of purpose. "What about our forces?" Jake asked. 10,000 knights spread across 200 worlds. We have ships, but nothing compared to what's coming." "Numbers may not matter," Zethver said quietly. "The ancient record suggests that the swarm responds only to certain types of behavior. They understand predation, consumption, domination. They cannot comprehend sacrifice for others." Dr. Rachel Stone, now Knight Commander Stone and the Order's chief strategist, had been analyzing the incoming data. If Elder Zethver is correct, then conventional military tactics will fail. The swarm expects beings to act in their own self-interest. What are you suggesting? Alex asked. That we use our greatest strength, we do what no one expects? We protect others instead of protecting ourselves. Jake understood immediately. We position our forces not where they can do the most damage to the enemy, but where they can save the most lives. The plan that emerged was audacious and terrifying. While the major powers focused on defending their most important worlds, the Knights would coordinate a galaxy-wide evacuation effort. They would save civilians, protect refugees, and hold the line wherever innocents were threatened. More importantly, they would serve as the communication network that the fractured galaxy desperately needed. Night orders on different worlds would relay information, coordinate defense efforts, and ensure that no species faced the swarm alone. The call went out across the galaxy to every Night Order, every training academy, every being who had ever sworn the oath to protect the innocent. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Knights abandoned their current missions and converged on threatened worlds. Retired Knights returned to service. Even candidates still in training volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. Knight Captain Ben Walker, now an elderly veteran leading his final mission, took command of the defense of the Andromedan colonies. The settlements had no military value, but they housed millions of civilians who could not be evacuated in time. "This is Knight Captain Walker to all units," he broadcast as the first swarm creatures appeared at the edge of the system. "Remember, our job is not to win. Our job is to buy time for the evacuation ships." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The swarm creatures were massive, their bioships capable of regenerating from seemingly fatal damage. Their weapons consumed energy rather than deflecting it, making shields useless. Most terrifying of all, they moved with perfect coordination as if controlled by a single vast intelligence, but the Knights adapted. When conventional weapons failed, they used their ships as ramming weapons. When shields proved useless, they relied on speed and maneuverability. When communication systems were jammed, they used hand signals and prearranged patterns that had been practiced for years. Most importantly, they refused to abandon their posts. Again and again, Night ships placed themselves between swarm creatures and civilian transports. They died by the hundreds, but every sacrifice bought more time for innocents to escape. The turning point came during the Battle of Kepler Station, when Knight Captain Walker made a discovery that changed everything. As his ship was being torn apart by swarm bioweapons, he noticed something strange in the creature's behavior. "All units, this is Walker," he transmitted on the emergency frequency. "The swarm creatures are hesitating. When we sacrifice ourselves for others, they pause. They don't understand what we're doing." Walker's final act was to ram his damaged ship into the largest swarm creature, destroying them both while allowing a refugee convoy to escape. But his sacrifice revealed the enemy's weakness. The swarm understood predation, consumption, and survival. They had evolved in the darkness between galaxies, where only the strongest survived and cooperation was weakness. They could not process the concept of beings who would die for strangers. The revelation spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Knights began using their willingness to sacrifice as a weapon, disrupting the swarm's coordination through acts of selfless heroism. The creatures would literally stop functioning when confronted with behavior that their hive mind could not understand. More importantly, the Knights' example began to inspire others. Hegemony officers who had spent years following selfish orders found themselves protecting enemy civilians. Corporate syndicate security forces abandoned profitable positions to help with evacuations. Federation diplomats stopped arguing and started coordinating relief efforts. For the first time in generations, the galaxy was united, not by treaties or trade agreements, but by the simple recognition that some things were worth protecting regardless of profit or politics. The war lasted 3 years. It cost the lives of over half the Knights who participated, including Grandmaster Jake Harrison, who died defending a hospital ship full of orphaned children. But in the end, the galaxy stood as one, the swarm faced with an enemy that operated on principles they could not comprehend, began to falter. Their perfect coordination broke down when confronted with beings who chose cooperation over competition, sacrifice over survival. The final battle took place in Earth's solar system, where the last swarm fleet made a desperate attack on humanity's homeworld. The defense was led by Knight Commander Alex Turner, now an old man but still fighting with the same courage he had shown at Proxima decades earlier. For all those who came before, Alex transmitted as the Night Fleet charged into battle. For all those who will come after. For the innocent who cannot protect themselves. The swarm was defeated not by superior technology or greater numbers, but by the simple truth that beings willing to die for strangers were more powerful than creatures that lived only for themselves. In the aftermath, as the galaxy began to rebuild, the Night Orders found themselves transformed. No longer were they curiosities or idealistic experiments. They had become the foundation upon which galactic civilization rested. The new Galactic Council, established to coordinate reconstruction efforts, granted the Knights permanent authority to intervene wherever justice was threatened. The Charter of Honor became the basis for galactic law, and the sight of a Knight's star and circle insignia brought hope to beings across 1,000 worlds. Elder Zethver, who had lived to see the galaxy's salvation, spent his final years documenting the lessons learned. The Knights did not bring new technology or superior weapons, he wrote. They brought something far more powerful. They reminded us that civilization's greatest strength is not its ability to destroy, but its willingness to protect. A century later, Knight Initiate Maya Chun stood before the memorial wall in the Great Hall of Terra Nova Academy. The names of fallen knights covered the entire surface, a testament to those who had died protecting strangers. "Do you think they knew?" she asked her instructor, Knight Commander Lopez. "That they were changing the galaxy forever?" Lopez smiled, placing a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "I think they knew they were doing what was right. The rest just happened because good people refused to let injustice stand." As Maya prepared for her first mission, she carried with her the same principles that had guided Jake Harrison and Alex Turner and countless others before her.